On April 14th, 2014, right after episode 2 of season 4, George R. R. Martin had this to say about the inspiration and creation of the Purple Wedding. I think the idea with Joffrey's death was to make it look like an accident. Someone's out celebrating, they haven't invented the Heimlich maneuver, so when someone gets food caught in his throat, it's very serious. I based it a little on the death of Eustace, the son of King Stephen of England. Stephen had usurped the crown from his cousin, the Empress Maud, and they fought a long civil war, and the anarchy in the war would be passed down to second generation. Because Maud had a son and Henry and Stephen a son, but Eustace choked to death at a feast. People are still debating thousands of years later, did he choke to death or was he poisoned? Because by removing Eustace, it brought about a peace that ended the English Civil War. Eustace's death was accepted as accidental, and I think that's what the murderers here were hoping for. The whole realm will see Joffrey choked to death on a piece of pie or something. But what they didn't count on was Cersei's immediate assumption that this was murder. Cersei wasn't fooled by this for a second. She doesn't believe that it was an accidental death. You saw the scene filmed. Does it come across as he could possibly be just choking, or is it very clear he's been poisoned?
When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. And yes, like the intro stated, we're going to be talking about the Purple Wedding. Now, I was kind of going back and forth on what exactly I wanted to talk about with the Purple Wedding because there's just so much you can talk about. It's something that still is kind of mysterious. We don't know everything that's going on here. Even George himself in another interview said there is still some stuff here that is going to be revealed probably later on in the series. So the question then becomes, what actually happened here? Is it the events that we hear from Littlefinger? Is it the way the show did it? The show basically confirmed what actually happened. The book hasn't done that whatsoever. The book has given us the idea of what Littlefinger proposes, and that is kind of what I'd say the general community believes. Now, I did a poll asking who the real target for the Purple Wedding was, and I was a bit surprised that Tyrion got as many votes as he did. It was about a 70-30 split on my channel, and so we're going to break down the background going into the Purple Wedding, the events that followed, and who actually was the target and who was the person trying to commit the murder. So the first part of this I want to talk about before we get deeper into it, I want to make it clear that George himself, in reference to the book and the show, says that this was meant to be an accident. It was meant to look like an accident anyway. The murderers wanted to, of course, make it not seem suspicious. Now, we know at least in the show, it doesn't appear that way whatsoever, just based on the way that it was kind of shot, in my opinion. You can definitely tell it's a poison. But in the books, in which the main point of this video, it's a lot more difficult than that, right? Because in terms of, if you think about the right after Joffrey dies, numerous people think that he's choking, which would be your natural assumption before you leaped to a poison. So we'll talk about that in this video, but let's get through the background events, give the timeline and the version of events that is proposed by Littlefinger and Sansa's conversation afterwards, and then we'll kind of poke at some things, look at some things in there that maybe don't make sense, and even look at the motivations for the main people, the main suspects of the case. I do want to say I have some sources that I'll have in the description for this. I try to do a lot more research for this video, notably Preston Jacobs' video from 8 years ago, as he proposes a theory that I, for one, am not like a supporter of, but I thought it was very educational, interesting to talk about. Also some big in-depth analysis of it on Reddit and other places like that. So that'll be in the description if you want to look at the background for this video for me. So let's look at some background information. Right away, the major part of this that we have to come to is Dantos is somebody that is Littlefinger's informant and basically a spy on Sansa, trying to get Sansa to come on this ship and leave King's Landing at a point. And so that all occurs in Clash of Kings, and we kind of are strung along as an audience as Dantos keeps saying, oh yeah, I'm going to get you out of the city to Sansa, but that never seems to happen. There's no progress, it seems like, until we get to A Storm of Swords. Now, A Storm of Swords is when a number of things start to kind of happen that really throw some wrenches into some plans. So the first part of this is from the Tyrells side of things. The Tyrells, at this time, they had heard some rumors about Joffrey, and and who he was as a person. When Littlefinger had gone to broker the alliance back in Book 2, apparently Olenna had asked him about how Joffrey was as a person. Again, Olenna and the Tyrells would be matching their house to the Lannisters and having Margaery marry Joffrey. Now, Littlefinger, publicly and to their face, saying Joffrey's praises, but through his own cronies, he basically spread some rumors about Joffrey, which put some doubt into the Tyrells. The Tyrells then question the person that was supposed to be queen before Margaery, Sansa. And so we see that all happening, and it basically confirms their suspicions that Joffrey is a monster. Okay, so let's move forward then. The Tyrells then plot to marry Sansa to Willis, which makes a lot of sense given the fact that Robb Stark's campaign was dying off rapidly, and Sansa was the key to the north, given that either everybody else was, missing or presumed dead. So Sansa was a very important piece. We know that Sansa then tells Dantos about these things, and Dantos then would relay that information to Littlefinger. Littlefinger would then give that information to the Lannisters to then screw up that plot. So that's kind of the way that this Tyrell stuff works out in terms of the Sansa side of things and some of the background. Now, a lot of this is somewhat alleged, like the Littlefinger stuff in terms of his time at Highgarden and trying to convince the Tyrells to go with the Lannisters is all alleged. We don't know if this is true. This is coming from Littlefinger himself, not the most trustworthy individual. This could be all trying to paint the Tyrells as being the perpetrators or the people that pulled the trigger on the murder of Joffrey. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind. A lot of this is how much do you believe. And when we get to the Littlefinger section of the video, I'll talk about, what I think was going on with his conversation with Sansa. We then see Tyrion marry Sansa, which is actually a pretty big deal. Tyrion's actually quite a powerful person at this point. If Tywin was to die, Tyrion, by the laws of Westeros, would become the Lord of Casterly Rock. He would have been then married Sansa, who would then have a major claim to Winterfell. Tyrion, if Tywin was to die at any point, Tyrion that quickly could very easily be in charge of 2 of the 7 kingdoms if everything went right. And so Tyrion is a very major political opponent. He is somebody that has made a ton of enemies through Book 2 and Book 3. Littlefinger is one of those, if you just want to throw that out there. There's a number of others. You think about his trial, how many people step up to go against him. Now, some of that's swayed by the Queen, of course, and Tyrion's position overall, how guilty he looks. So, yeah, Tyrion is somebody that you can't underestimate in this. He doesn't have many allies left, and a lot of his power has been stripped by his father. We know the marriage then is unconsummated, which is, again, extremely important. Because if you're somebody like Littlefinger, if you're someone like the Tyrells, and you're trying to sweep Sansa away, and if Tyrion was to die, if he was the target of this purple wedding, you can, kind of similar to the Margaery Renly situation, you can marry Sansa, because that marriage was basically illegitimate, that you can marry them to somebody else. And so that's a very important note. Because if you're going to go with the theory that Tyrion was the target, this is a big part of that. And so, yeah, that kind of gets us through our background information going into the purple wedding. So the purple wedding then, and we have some events before we actually get to the true wedding, but this is part of it, is we see that Dantos gives Sansa this very suspect hairnet. Dantos has been saying that he's going to get her out of the city, and all he gives her is this hairnet. This was prompted, it would assume, by Littlefinger. Littlefinger also knows about the hairnet later down the road when Sansa reunites with Littlefinger. So this is a massive part of this theory and seems to be the way that the poison was delivered to the wedding. Now, however you want to go with the theory after that is going to be up to interpretation, but this hairnet is extremely important to how we get the poison that kills Joffrey. During this time, we also know that Littlefinger has left before the wedding, basically giving him an alibi for not being responsible for Joffrey's death. We know that's not really true. Littlefinger is waiting to get Sansa after the wedding. Sansa thinks about this in terms of the hairnet. Sir Dantos had said that the hairnet was magic, that it would take her home. He told her she must wear it tonight at Joffrey's wedding. The silver wire stretched tight across her knuckles. And so this is really important because it seems to be imperative to the plan that this needed to be at the wedding. So that's really important to the theory. Even after the wedding, Dantos suggests this about the reasoning of the hairnet. Sansa pulled away from his touch. You said I must wear the hairnet. The silver net with what sort of stones are those? Amethysts, black amethysts from Shy, my lady. They're no amethysts, are they? Are they, you lied? Black amethysts, he swore. There was magic in them. There was murder in them. Softly, my lady, softly. No murder. He choked on his pigeon pie. Dantos chortled, oh, tasty, tasty pie. Silver and stones, that's all it was. Silver and stones and magic. The bells were tolling, and the wind was making a noise like he had made as he tried to suck a breath of air. You poisoned him. You did. You took a stone from my hair. So again, we're kind of skipping a little bit in the future, but I think it's important to understanding the timeline and what characters knew. So Dantos, again, under the guidance of, it would appear, Littlefinger, was told that this was going to be the key to everything. It was going to hold the poison. And so at this point, you then get this idea that Dantos brings up that, oh, it was the pie, that he choked on the pigeon pie, even though we know that's not the case. Even if the pie is what killed him, it wasn't because he choked. It's because of the poison that would have been in the, like, maybe the lemon topping or whatever that's on the pie, or would have been in the actual pie. Now, I believe if you're going to go with the pie theory, it would have had to have been in the topping. That makes the most amount of sense to dissolve the poison and things like that. But we can go with whatever theory you want on that idea. It's interesting that Dantos tells Sansa that it was the actual pie. Now, again, this isn't all that relevant to where we're at right now in the story, but when we get to the after parts of this, I kind of want you guys to remember this for later. So the next part of the timeline, we get to Littlefinger. He hires the dwarves for the actual wedding feast, and this is going to be done to, again, bring some conflict between Tyrion and Joffrey. Now, Littlefinger doesn't know how much conflict that's going to brew, right? He doesn't know to what extent, but it's to make Tyrion look either angry or have some, again, attention drawn to Tyrion and Joffrey's conflict, so that if either one of them was the real target and was to die, it would almost be kind of believed that the other person might have done it, right? It's to make it to where you have an out. And there's going to be multiple points where it's kind of suspect that multiple people could be involved. That's a good thing for Littlefinger, because Littlefinger, it's going to alleviate one person kind of being the suspect. I've been listening to a case on the John Bennett Ramsey. It's one of the most famous, like, unsolved cases. And one of the reasons it's so difficult to solve is, for one, bad detective work, but there's just a lot of different suspects. There's a lot of different things that possibly could have gone on that just we don't know. It's kind of the same here if you were someone in Westeros, right? When you think about the investigation going on, Jaime and the Kingsguard are going to have kind of their own investigation after the Purple Wedding. It's kind of the same idea. And so I think that's a very interesting part of this. But let's look at the quote that Littlefinger says about the hiring of the dwarves. As he led her below, he said, tell me of the feast. The queen took such pains. The singers, the jugglers, the dancing bear. Did your little lord husband enjoy my jousting dwarves? Yours, I had to send to Bravos for them and hide them away in a brothel until the wedding. The expense was exceeded only by the bother. It is surprisingly difficult to hide a dwarf. But with Joffrey, one had to splash it about before he realized he could drink it. When I told him about my little surprise, his grace said, why would I want some ugly dwarves at my feast? I hate dwarves. I had to take him by the shoulder and whisper, not as much as your uncle will. The deck rocked beneath her feet, and Sansa felt as if the world itself had grown unsteady. They think Tyrion poisoned Joffrey. Sir Dantos said they seized him. So again, that's really important. Littlefinger seems to be wanting some attention drawn to the character of Tyrion so that there is this built-up enmity or conflict during the actual wedding ceremony. Very important to understand. So we now get to the actual feast, and Olenna has some quite interesting actions, given everything we've led up to believe so far. Everything has been in place so that Sansa has this poison in her hairnet the day of the wedding. And so we get this from Olenna Tyrell during the wedding feast, and right before everything kind of kicks off. You do look quite exquisite, child, Lady Olenna told Sansa when she tottered up to them in a cloth of gold gown that must have weighed more than she did. The wind has been at your hair, though. The little old woman reached up and fussed at the loose strands, tucking them back into place and straightening Sansa's hairnet. I was very sorry to hear about your losses, she said, as she tugged and fiddled. Your brother was a terrible traitor, I know, but if we start killing men at weddings, they'll be even more frightened of marriage than they are presently. Now, what I think is even more interesting as things start to go on is that Lady Olenna seems to specifically antagonize Tyrion. She talks about wanting, Sansa to maybe come to Highgarden and kind of publicly going against Tyrion and stuff like that. Like, oh, Tyrion, I thought he'd be leading armies and things like that. So I think that's the interesting part of this. Is not only is that Olenna goes straight for this hairnet that we know is where the poison is, but also she's antagonizing Tyrion as if she either one, Tyrion is going to be a target in this whole plot, or two, she knows what, they're setting Tyrion up more or less. Tyrion is going to be set up as the target regardless of what kind of occurs here. And the way she even goes about with Sansa, where she's kind of nicer to Sansa, it almost feels like, because Sansa also is going to be kind of a fall guy in this situation as well. She almost seems to have sympathy for the character of Sansa, because I do not believe that Olenna and Littlefinger were on the same page. If they were working in tandem, I don't think they were on the same page. I don't think Olenna expected Littlefinger to get Sansa out of King's Landing. So that's kind of the interesting part of this, right? And so that's kind of the first step, right? Is where's this poison now? So the poison that we believe is in the hairnet is now with Olenna. So moving through the feast, the next real notable thing that we do end up seeing is we do see this jousting dwarf pair come to perform. And this instantly sets Tyrion and Joffrey at a standoff. Now, before I get any further, I want to show what I believe is probably the best representation of what the dais would have looked like in the seating arrangement. I think Preston Jacobs does a really quality job of setting this all up. So I do want to have this up as I'm talking about it, because this is the most accurate one that I've seen personally. And given what we know from the story does not make it clear whatsoever where everyone was actually sitting. So when we get to this representation here, where you kind of have the Tyrell side of things on the right side of the table, and you have Tyrion and then Sansa all the way at the end, it makes sense. Preston Jacobs' rationale, I think, was really sound here. There's nobody described as being to the right of Sansa, and they are also described as being kind of almost the furthest away from Joffrey that you can be as part of the royal family. I do think it's kind of peculiar that Tyrion is on the Tyrell side. I do think it makes a lot of sense given the hostilities between the Lannister children, Cersei and Tyrion at this point. So it would make a lot of sense given Cersei was kind of the person in charge of a lot of the arrangements and things like that, to sit Tyrion kind of really far away from her. But from here, you see Marjorie, Mason, his wife, Olenna, and then you had Garland and his wife who were sitting next to Tyrion, one of my favorite Tyrells, by the way. And so this seems to be accurate. Now, we're going to bring this back up a little bit later on because I think it is relevant. Just keep in mind, this is the way I believe that the seating arrangement was. I think that Preston Jacobs was right on the money. So as this then goes down, and we're seeing this standoff between Joffrey and Tyrion, Joffrey makes Tyrion his cupbearer. Now, this is very essential because I think this gets lost a lot. There is no way that someone like Littlefinger or Olenna could have possibly known that Tyrion would have become the person serving wine to Joffrey. That to me is a key point. So I do think that in a lot of ways, the way that Joffrey was poisoned was not necessarily planned. If you believe Joffrey is the target, if you believe Tyrion's the target, you still kind of go down the same route, right? The way it was going to be poisoned would have happened probably the same way regardless. But if you're going at it from a point of when Joffrey gets poisoned, if this was a targeted attack on Joffrey specifically, this is important because now this job where, okay, there's already this issue, conflict between Tyrion and Joffrey. Now Tyrion is the person in charge of the wine cup for Joffrey. So things like refilling it, giving the cup to Joffrey, that's now all going to be Tyrion. So if you're Olenna and you still have the poison at this point, and you have kind of two options again where this theory goes down, if it's in the pie or if it's in the wine, you've now been given a golden opportunity. Because you can easily frame Tyrion for this. He's the one with the most access to the cup. And especially when you think about this part of it. This is, to me, one of the most important parts of this theory. Is that kind of different from the way the show goes. The show has the wine cup then go back to the middle where Marjorie and Joffrey are. In the book, it's not like that at all. So I'm going to again quote from the book to kind of follow where the actual cup is if we believe the cup is what was poisoned. Tyrion did as he was bid, but as he reached for the handle, Joff kicked the chalice through his legs. "Pick it up. Are you as clumsy as you are ugly?" He had to crawl under the table to find the thing. "Good. Now fill it with wine." He claimed a flagon from a serving girl and filled the goblet 3/4 full. "No, on your knees, dwarf." Kneeling, Tyrion raised up the heavy cup. wondering if he was about to get a second bath. But Joffrey took the wedding chalice one-handed, drank deep, and set it on the table. "You can get up now, uncle." So this is really important. The cup stays on the table where Joffrey and Tyrion were at. We know Joffrey comes to Tyrion's table because Sir Garland warns Tyrion a little bit earlier, a couple paragraphs earlier, that Joffrey was coming to Tyrion. So where this was set down, most likely, if we go back to the picture, had to have been around where Tyrion and Garland was. It had to have been over in that area. And so when you think about it, if the wine cup is where the poison went, you're going to have to think, how did it get in there? Now, the next part of it is, okay, Joffrey is not poisoned. So if it is the wine, it couldn't have been poisoned yet. It had to have been poisoned now. Now, the cup does still have wine in it. Joffrey did not drink all of it, but he probably drank a good, quarter of it, right? There's probably maybe half or a little less than that left. So that's really, really important. But there's also a point here that Preston Jacobs brings up that I do agree with, but it's not set in stone, is that when we do see that Joffrey is with Tyrion, Marjorie tries to get him to go, and leave Tyrion alone, all this, stop this public display that doesn't look good on them. Olenna is noted as, she talks that she's leaning on her cane. That to me would imply that she's standing up or is moved. Not that she's sitting down. Now, maybe she is, maybe while she's sitting down, she's all still leaning on her cane. To me, it implies that she's standing up, though. And so that's relatively important because as the attention's going to shift, Olenna is still standing up. She is still somebody that maybe could have, maneuvered around. That is really, really important for the rest of this kind of theory. So keep that in the back of your mind. Joffrey then, like I said, returns with Marjorie for the pigeon pie. The pigeon pie sequence happens, and this is relatively important as well. As Joffrey and Marjorie are doing this whole ceremony thing with the pie, everyone is distracted by it. Sir Ilyn Payne no longer has the sword ice, something that Sansa is relatively interested in and paying close attention to. Everybody seems like their eyes are on this. Even later on, after the Purple Wedding happens on reflection by the Kingsguard, it's going to be noted that, yes, while the pigeon pie was being cut open, everybody was looking at it. They weren't looking at servants going by, or they weren't looking at people that were moving around the dais. And so Olenna, if she's naturally somebody that moves slower, if she's standing up and still kind of lingering as Joffrey and Marjorie, walk away, that's not necessarily suspicious, right? For just a normal person, right? And so Olenna has a chance here. Everyone is now focused on what is occurring with Joffrey and Marjorie. But here's where it gets a little interesting to me, because if you do believe it is the wine that was poisoned, Joffrey is the target, how does Olenna, somebody that's not the most nimble, not the most steady-handed, do this almost in front of the entire audience? If a single person had been looking more towards Tyrion than the king, they might have caught a glimpse of what happened. That doesn't occur. So, yes, if there was a chance where the wine cup was what was poisoned, it had to have happened here, when everybody was looking at Joffrey and Marjorie, not Tyrion and the wine cup. And the wine cup, you have to think, Joffrey sets it down, right? It's not going to be like it's closer to the back end of the table. Now, Olenna, you would assume, is probably behind Tyrion and Sansa. So, again, it's kind of almost a reach over as well. So that's the one thing that I think is the most suspicious thing about the theory we're told about how things happened. How does the poison go in there when it doesn't seem like it'd be likely given this method? But the alternative in the same vein also is not great as well. There's still a lot of mystery here that leaves me questioning things. So we then see that Tyrion is served some pie. Now, the pie is not necessarily prepared right in front of you, but a slice is brought out to you, to both Tyrion, Sansa, the rest of the people on the dais. But there's this lemon, more or less cream that they put over the top of the pie that's done right in front of you. Now, for me, if there was a situation where the pie itself was poisoned, I think it would have had to been the poison was put into the cream. It would have made it less suspicious. It would have been much easier to do based upon the way that we see that the stranglers used in book 2 at the very beginning with mixing it in wine, which seems like a clear foreshadowing to the Purple Wedding. It seemed like most likely, if you believe it's in the pie, it was in that cream. So the real question is, did this random server poison it? Maybe getting the poison from Olenna at some point, given how servants are going back and forth the whole time. That could be very possible. Some people have also thought that maybe Olenna was not even getting the little amethyst that's in her hair, the poison, and maybe at some point during this, the pigeon pie, when this is happening, one of the servants got it out of her hair. Again, I think that's very there's either way you think about this. Joffrey and Margaery were so much of the spotlight that not a single person saw either Olenna basically hovering over Tyrion, which it does help that he's shorter, so it would have been easier to like reach around him or whatever, and put something in a drink, or that a servant like went over to Sansa's hairnet and picked something out of it. So again, something very suspicious happens, but because of the attention, it's not seen, or at least nobody comes forward and says that's what happened. But it's really important to understand that Tyrion does not eat his own pie, because that's something Joffrey is going to eat right after this. But let's go to then the quote of Joffrey coming over to Tyrion, eating the pie and drinking the wine, the whole point of this video. But before they could make their retreat, Joffrey was back. "Uncle, where are you going? You're my cupbearer, remember? I need to change into fresh garb, your grace. May I have your leave?" "No, I like the look of you this way. Serve me my wine." The king's chalice was on the table where he'd left it. Tyrion had to climb back onto his chair to reach it. Joffrey yanked it from his hands and drank long and deep, his throat working as the wine ran down his chin. "My lord," Margaery said, "we should return to our places. Lord Buckler wants to toast us. My uncle hasn't eaten his pigeon pie." Holding the chalice one-handed, Joffrey jammed his other into Tyrion's pie. "It's ill luck to not eat the pie," he scolded, as he filled his mouth with hot, spiced pigeon. "See, it's good," spitting out flakes of crust. He coughed and helped himself to another fistful. "Dry, though, needs washing down." Joffrey took a swallow of wine and coughed again more violently. "I want to see you ride that cough, pig. Uncle, I want..." His words broke into a fit of coughing. And so this is really, really interesting because there's a couple things of note. One, the chalice. It does not leave the table once again. Tyrion then has to get the chalice, which he has to stand up on. He had to climb onto the back of the chair to actually reach it. That would actually imply that, once again, that this chalice was quite a bit of an arm's reach away from Tyrion, which makes it, again, even more suspect how Olenna or someone like maybe Garland was able to get this poison into there. Yes, Garland possibly could have delivered the poison as well, even though I don't think it makes much sense given Garland's personality to do something. It had to have been Olenna if it was a Tyrell, in my opinion. So at this point, the chalice then is given to Joffrey. Now Joffrey drinks it. He drinks quite deeply. Nothing happens. He's still fine. And then he goes for the pie. At this point then, the pie that he eats starts to give him those side effects. He starts to get really dry mouth, not being able to speak, and eventually he's not able to breathe and dies. Now this is very different from the way that Cresson dies. Cresson dies almost immediately from the poison going down his throat. He instantly dies, he can't speak. Joffrey, very different. Now, there's a couple of explanations, in my opinion, for maybe this idea. One, Joffrey is much younger than Cresson. Cresson maybe could have been affected by the poison much quicker. He was much more frail. He had a lot of health issues. His body was very weak, and he was close to dying regardless of old age. So the poison probably worked a lot faster in him. So Joffrey, I think to me, he's a younger, he's pretty healthy kid. The poison probably didn't work nearly as quickly as it did with Cresson. Now, the other part of this is that I think that if you're going with the pie theory, we don't necessarily know how the poison works when it's put with food, right? Because when Cresson does it, it's just with wine. And so you don't know how that would have gone down. Plus, you're also thinking Joffrey is, regardless of if the poison's in the wine cup or the pie, he's drinking and eating at the same time. Does that maybe help digest the poison maybe a bit to where it doesn't affect you instantly? Who knows, right? There's a lot of questions with that aspect of it. But either way, Joffrey doesn't get the effects until after he eats the pie, and this is when he dies. Most people believe that Joffrey was choking. That's kind of yelled. That's kind of what most people believe was going on until we get Cersei declare that it was a poisoning. We know Sansa leaves at this point, and at that, Tyrion is basically sentenced to be arrested by Cersei. And we'll get to kind of the end part of the narrative events of what we know actually occurred. So Sansa then meets up with Littlefinger. Littlefinger kills Dantos. Obviously, he's a liability, and he could not be trusted. Sansa then tries to figure out what exactly happened, and Littlefinger goes on his kind of big spiel about what actually occurred. Now, I already talked about the background, but that's in this speech, right? Littlefinger was somebody that already had connections with the Tyrells, informing them about, the Tyrells inquiring after Joffrey, making Loras part of the Kingsguard, Marjorie marrying Joffrey, and the issues that would arise. That the Tyrells didn't need Joffrey, right? They just needed Marjorie to marry a king, and that could be Tommen. Now, the thing I have here that's interesting about Littlefinger and his questioning here is he makes Sansa kind of come to the conclusion, right? Sansa is the one that prompts everything, and Littlefinger really just builds off that. It seems like it's almost this teaching moment of Littlefinger trying to show her how the game is played. And so that is kind of the way this goes down, that it's alleged that the Tyrells, led by Olenna, killed Joffrey so that Marjorie didn't have to marry Joffrey, because that was going to lead to eventually Joffrey would do some sort of cruelty to Marjorie. And given the fact that Loras and her are so close, that would then lead to Loras doing some sort of action that would get them both killed, something that Olenna could not tolerate. That is the events of how they play out that were given in the normal, traditional story. Let's then break that down. I'll go with the common theory, what was presented in the show, all that stuff. I believe that this was an assassination that was not nearly as calculated or planned as we're led to believe. I think that basically Olenna was given the poison and was kind of given almost free reign of when to use it. And the perfect scenario popped up when Tyrion was made the cupbearer right after this joust. And I think that Littlefinger would have used that, one, because Littlefinger could have used that to put a lot of the suspicion on Tyrion and get him to be the main suspect. But I do believe that this was supposed to be viewed as an accident. And if you think about the initial reaction, most people believe it was an accident. And if you even think about how Tywin would have reacted to this, I also believe that Tywin would have been willing to accept that this was just a choking, because Tywin would have saw the benefit of, one, getting Tommen on the throne, and two, he also kind of would have realized, okay, this is the best way possible Joffrey could die, right? It's not by, again, the public believe it would be a choking, not that somebody murdered him. It's a sign where it's like, okay, well, unfortunate event, but this has happened before. It's not like he died in some way to our enemies, right? So I think if it came down to it, if Cersei wasn't there, this would have gone on as an accident. What George R. R. Martin talked about in my introduction quote. This assassination was supposed to be an accident. It was supposed to look like one. And that's kind of the way it goes down until Cersei kind of mucks it all up. Now, it actually goes really, really well for somebody like Littlefinger, because now Sansa's husband is likely going to be executed. That's really actually impactful for them as a whole. I also think that when you think about what Olenna was trying to do, instantly, if you're Olenna, even if people believe it's a poisoning, they're not going to point to you being the poisoner or your family being the poisoners, because, well, you guys, the Tyrells, you're about to be married into the Lannister family. You're about to have the queen on the throne. You're going to have all this power. Who are people that would want Joffrey dead or don't like Joffrey? Well, Sansa, Tyrion would be prime suspects. That right away would shift all of that kind of blame away from them. And so I think that in terms of the way we get this normal story, it makes a lot of sense from the motivations from the Tyrells, from Littlefinger. It plays into both of their hands quite perfectly. Now, there are holes in it. I mentioned this. The execution of how does the poison get into the wine chalice really bothers me. On a reread, it just seems like, how would Olenna have done that? Now, maybe Olenna got somebody else to do it, but would Olenna trust, a random servant or anyone else to put this poison into the cup? I don't know. And so you look at that and you go, that's a little weird. That's why I think a lot of this theory is still up for debate, because there are so many kind of question marks. The next question mark I have is, why did the Tyrells work with Littlefinger out of everyone? Why did they need this poison to come through with Sansa and her hairnet? Does that not seem to be a bit risky. Couldn't they have just snuck this little poison into her pocket or anything like that, like Crescent does? It's all a bit questionable to me. Now, maybe the reason that they wanted it to be done with Sansa is because if Sansa was found to be missing one of these amethysts on her hairnet, it would point to her being the person to blame. And so that would lead you to another suspect that could take the fall if someone believed it was a murder. That's very possible. But I do think it's a lot to risk because you got to remember the timing of Joffrey's death also is really important. If you're the Tyrells, you want Joffrey to die before he can consummate the marriage to Marjorie and make it official. Same idea, the same excuse with like Renly, for instance. So I find it really weird that you would leave this all down to Sansa, who Preston Jacobs and other people that don't really go along with what the normal story is told by Littlefinger is that, well, okay, wait, why would they leave it up to somebody that could have easily not have worn the hairnet, could have easily have just said she was sick and didn't want to show up? She even thinks about doing that. I think there's a lot of reasonable doubt. Like it's something where it's like, okay, if you're, the U.S. courts is basically you're innocent until proven guilty. If there is reasonable doubt, you will not be really charged. And so I think that's kind of the case here. If you brought the Purple Wedding to court, there is reasonable doubt that it could have been somebody else besides, Lena being involved in this. I think Littlefinger, regardless, was involved, whether it was Tyrion or Joffrey as the target through maybe the pie or the wine. But regardless, there's some very questionable things that prop up. Also, Littlefinger is not a trustworthy person, so anything he tells to Sansa, you have to take with a grain of salt. Now, I do have an explanation that I don't see many people bringing up. Littlefinger, his one weakness that's been shown consistently throughout the later books is Sansa. He tells too much to Sansa, it would seem. He has this weird attachment to her, like for Catelyn. He is somebody that seems to be overstepping his hand with Sansa. And I believe that Sansa will be the reason that Littlefinger dies by the end of the story. Kind of a student becomes the master. I view the Purple Wedding as this situation in which it's almost him teaching her how things go. It's the end of Sansa's kind of like fairy tale arc, right? It's kind of now she's a player. She's not really going to be a pawn. It's her growing into becoming a player. That's a lot of the reasoning why I think that he would tell her some of the things that were going on. And because he had to. Littlefinger has to give Sansa some like reasoning and explanation as to what occurred. Even though she doesn't care about Joffrey all that much, it was still a traumatic experience to watch somebody like die like that and her being directly involved in it. She was, again, a major proponent as to why he died. And so I think that's all really relevant. Now, if you go to the pie theory, which is kind of more of the Tyrion was the target theory, I think the interesting part about this theory is there's two ideas that could possibly come up with the poison. One, the poison was unrelated to Sansa's poisoning. Like, her poison didn't actually matter. There was another poisoning going on at the same time. Another assassination was kind of being planned, and this is the one that went forward. It just, incidentally, that Joffrey ate the pie, something you could not predict if you were the poisoner. This could have been somebody else using a poison, as well. I don't like that theory at all, really. I don't like the idea that there's two different assassinations going on at the same time. And then, so the other part of this would be that this random servant then poisoned this pie that was going to kill Tyrion, and that's what kills Joffrey. I don't know how much of this theory I like, because the issue becomes, if you're Littlefinger, you're trusting this, again, if it is Littlefinger that was, distributing the poison, right? If that is actually the case, you're trusting a random servant to do that. And maybe it was Oberyn, maybe it was somebody else. Again, I don't like the idea that it was Oberyn who was poisoning this pie, especially because it would be killing Tyrion, and Oberyn has really no motivation to kill Tyrion at this point. So, again, going with the idea that Littlefinger is the person that poisons this pie, if that is the case, he trusts, for some reason, this random serving guy who we don't ever see that person is taken care of. That could be a loose end if that is the case. It just, to me, doesn't strike me the best that makes a lot of sense. And so, by the end of the video, my conclusion still stands that it was through the wine. Can you make arguments that it could have been maybe somebody else? Possibly, but there's just too much information that points to, okay, Olenna gets this poison from Sansa that's built up. That kind of aligns with Littlefinger's story. Olenna then takes this poison, and at some point, when people were distracted, poisons the wine chalice. Now, there is another part I forgot to mention about this that also is very suspect. Marjorie also was drinking from that wine chalice. So would Olenna really take the risk of poisoning a wine chalice that Marjorie may drink from? You know, and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, does Olenna tell Marjorie that it's poisoned? Like, how does that go down? And so there is, again, that's my main conclusion of this video. And it's why I think a lot of people wanted me to talk about it and why a lot of people love discussing it, is that there's a lot of reasonable doubt. There's reasonable doubt, even though I think this is the most likely option, there is still things that have question marks. And it's one of the reasons why I think that George, and I think in another interview, he talked about how there is still mysteries with the Purple Wedding that he wants to explore in the future. I think this is kind of what he means, right? Like, you know how in the show we got Olenna like basically confessing to poisoning Joffrey? I think we may see something similar in the books to kind of really put everything together, to wrap it all together, because there feels like there's some missing points here that we just do not have based upon the POVs we have and the information we have been told. So again, I do like both of these theories for what they discuss and what they talk about. And I didn't even discuss everything that you could with this theory. This theory, again, we're going on 47 minutes of recording as of me talking about this. And I don't think I even scratched the surface with some of the other evidence in here. I tried to talk about as much of a wide gap, I tried to talk about a lot of this as much as I could, given my time constraints. But there's more that you can talk about. So feel free in the comments to discuss more about this, especially if you want to talk more about the pie theory. Again, I'm someone that tried to do a good amount of research for it, trying to figure out why people believe that theory and some of the rationale behind it. If you've got more in the comments, let me know down there in the comments. I did this kind of a video, I think about 2 years ago, a very early video on the channel where I did a couple videos on the Purple Wedding. I'm kind of redoing those because I think they need to be a bit better. I want to do one more on Tywin and him knowing maybe what was happening at the Purple Wedding. But we'll see if you guys like this video. Maybe I'll consider doing that one. But let me know what you guys all think, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.